Hello, and I don't know if it's morning or good afternoon, it's 12 o'clock, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to call it. But I'm really delighted to be with you all today. My name's Sarah Armstrong-Smith. I'm a Chief Security Advisor at Microsoft. My role is to liaise with strategic and major customers across Europe. And it's to understand their challenges when it comes to digital transformation, cloud adoption. Well, the one thing that really keeps everyone up at night is all around cybersecurity. And I'm not just going to be focusing on cybersecurity today. I'm really going to be talking about the trust model and how things are evolving. And then I'm going to get straight in, really, in terms of what we're sort of saying. Now, I think it's fair to say over the last 2 or 3 years, we have seen significant transformation. And this is not just because we have been in a massive pandemic. And we have seen huge amounts of change. And really one of the outputs of this is really around hybrid working. Now, hybrid working is not new. This is not a result of the pandemic. Really what's happened is an acceleration into hybrid working. What do we really mean when we're talking about hybrid working? It's the ability to work from any place at any time or from any device. And that's really started to transform the way that consumers, customers, partners really see the role of big tech. Well, not only have we had a pandemic, we have also seen the biggest cyber attack that we have ever seen, and that's SolarWinds. Now, we genuinely say that SolarWinds is the most sophisticated attack we have ever seen by a nation-state actor. And talking about nation-state actors as well, we're right in the middle of a war, and we're just about to go headlong into a recession. So we've seen huge amounts of change. And during that period, we've seen a lot of companies who are really evolving their business models. And we have seen a mass acceleration to the cloud. Now, a lot of these companies were already on a trajectory to the cloud. But what we've started to see is where we've seen lots of red tape, lots of hesitation, things that took weeks, things that took months is now happening in days. And the real value that we're starting to see with the cloud and people's adoption of the cloud is their ability to spin up projects, spin up proof of concepts at a pace that has never been able to do that before. But also what we've started to see is a huge integration between the IT, the IoT, and the OT, all combining together. So when we talk about security, we talk about privacy, and we talk about resilience. No longer are we just talking about IT. And we've kind of got to this position where we talk about resilience, and what does that really mean? And at the early days of the pandemic, it was all about availability. It was all about how do I get my services up and running as quickly as possible. But as the pandemic turned into months, into years, and you could argue we're still in a pandemic, it really started to make companies realize that if I'm going to remain competitive, I need to evolve. And we started to see huge amounts of change with lots of different companies and how they're reacting. So we're not just talking about resilience in the true sense of the word. We're talking about this level of perseverance. We've got to kind of expect the unexpected, and we've got to be able to deal with anything and everything that is coming our way. And this is kind of the reality that we're living in. And the pace of change, the ferocity of change, is like nothing we've ever seen. Now, just to put that into perspective, through the early days of the pandemic, when people were panicking about how do I get people working, whether that's information workers, frontline workers, how do I get them online? How do I get them communicating? And we started to see this use of collaboration tools. And particularly in Teams alone, we went from 17 million active users to over 250 million active users, and we're probably about 2 billion minutes of collaboration that's going on every day. And really where we are, we're at this kind of tech intensity, if you like, where technology is intrinsically embedded in absolutely everything. We talk a lot about tech for good. We've seen huge amounts of capability, how we're changing, how we're evolving, even with hospitals, critical infrastructure, education. It's all got technology at the core. But with that comes risk. And what we're really talking about is the volume of data that is being generated. Now, by 2025, so we're talking 2 years from now, it is estimated that over half of the world's data will reside in the cloud. That's approximately 180 zettabytes of data. Not only have we got the cloud, we're starting to see this acceleration with 5G. So we're bringing the cloud, we're bringing connectivity closer together. It's also estimated that we're going to have between 25 and 30 billion the remote devices, smart technologies, and that's just going to continue to grow, continue to extrapolate. And the reality is data is literally exploding. So not only do we have to be cognizant of the actual data, we also have data about data. We've got telemetry data, we've got audit logs, we've got security logs. Even with our mobile phones, our devices, our every move is being tracked. And when we're looking at geolocation technology and all of these things, so data is just going to continue to extrapolate. It's going to continue to grow. And at the same time, we're starting to see a huge increase in change when it comes to regulations, when it comes to standards. Now, I think we can all agree that regulations and standards lag way behind the pace of change in technology. Even when we think about something like the GDPR, that's 6 years old. It took years of effort to bring it to fruition. And as soon as it was published, it was out of date. And this is the reality that we're living with. It's that constant pace, a constant change that we're dealing with. And through all of this, privacy really does become an imperative. It's not just about a regulatory requirement to enable privacy. It's what our consumers, it's what customers, it's what our partners are expecting of us. Now, there is a thought process again, but in the next year or next couple of years, over 75% of the planet is going to be covered by some kind of regulatory requirement when it comes to privacy. And we're going to start to see these regulations evolving and evolving at some pace. So what's the role of big tech in all of this? Well, I'm going to hazard a guess that every single person in this room is probably utilizing a Microsoft product. So if you're utilizing Windows, or your kids or you are utilizing Xbox, you might even be utilizing Azure, Bing, search engines. And when the world utilizes your technology to the pace and scale that it does, you carry a lot of weight and a lot of responsibility on your shoulders. And that's the real challenge. So we're talking individuals, we're talking companies, we're even talking about nations that are critically dependent on our technology. And we have a role to play in terms of not just the here and now, but how things can continue to evolve. We have tremendous relationships with regulators, different countries, different nations, when it comes to understanding what is coming, what's on the horizon. It's no good for you to find out you've got a new regulatory requirement on Monday that you suddenly now have to adhere to. So we run at a pace that was even faster than what you are running at. I just want to kind of put that into perspective. So really what we're talking about, we talk about the Microsoft Cloud, and it's really one. So it's M365, it's Azure, and it's Dynamics. We committed to the cloud probably about 12 years ago, and Microsoft actually has the biggest cloud platform in the world. And really, where are we standing for? There's a couple of things when we're talking about what is it the cloud, what are we trying to do? When we talk about decentralized computing, it's really about bringing the power of the cloud, the agility, the flexibility, right where you need it. So if you're creating, you're developing, you're doing all of these things, you need the power of the cloud at your fingertips. Now, what we've seen with a lot of regulators, they're starting to get really strict about where's my data. Where's it physically hosted from? Now, in days of old, when you're working on premise, it's your data center, you may have outsourced it, you know exactly where your data is. Arguably, maybe not so much when it's in the cloud, or you've got multiple devices, hundreds, thousands of applications. The regulators are really picking up on this when it comes to data sovereignty and data residency. And how we utilize, we have, when we're talking about the power of the cloud, we have over 220 data centers, and we use AI ops. So we are constantly monitoring, we're utilizing machine learning capability to monitor those data centers. And we see the cloud almost as a living, breathing entity that has to continually move and adjust to the demands of the world. And to kind of put that into perspective, again, if we think about kind of the peak in the pandemic, we had 8 times the capacity requirements in some of the countries. So when you're thinking about how would you be able to amend and add storage at 8 times capacity in a short space of time? And we're really trying to empower companies, creators, and that's really about how do you get your services out as quickly as possible? Now, I mentioned some of the services that Microsoft had, and one of those is GitHub. Now, GitHub is utilized by approximately 75 million developers, and they're continuing to grow. And that's bringing all of those developers when it comes together with open source technology and different capabilities. But also, we're starting to see the role of citizen developers as well. These are normal people really building and taking advantage of new services. And we're really kind of thinking about what is the world going to look like as we evolve to the future. We've talked about hybrid working, but the reality is we have to make sure that we bring services to all of those remote areas. So we're literally going to be bringing the cloud to the cloud with Azure Space. Now, Azure Space utilizes satellite technology and uplift. It connects through 5G. So irrespective of where you are, where you're based, you can still build, you can still design, you can still utilize the technology. And kind of core to everything that we're talking about is this principle of trust by design. Now, I know that sounds like a cliche, and I'm Microsoft, I'm a little bit biased, and of course I'm going to sit here and tell you you should trust the cloud, you should trust Microsoft. But actually, this whole principle of trust is nothing new to Microsoft. And actually, when Bill Gates founded the company in 1975, and believe it or not, Microsoft is 47 years old, he had a vision to have a PC in every home. Now, I think he's kind of succeeded that multiple times over. And our vision has kind of gone way past that into empowerment. How can we empower you as individuals, as companies and nations to utilize the technology and utilize it in a way that's going to work for you? And there's a couple of principles that we live by. We do not compete with our customers. We do not share data. We do not sell data. So I think that's kind of core. But in terms of what are we doing when we're building this kind of trust around the world, and I talked about privacy, and we think about privacy from a personal data perspective, but actually privacy extends right the way through. So whatever you're doing in the cloud is always private to you. Now, this is a kind of misconception. Well, you're an American company. You must allow the American government backdoor access. No, absolutely not. And in fact, we have gone up against the US Senate to defend our customers' rights to privacy. And for you to make sure that you have additional assurance, we also deploy double key encryption. So even if somebody came to us and said, please open, please let us have access, we physically cannot have access into that environment without the other key, which is the key that our customers hold. Now, as you can imagine, security is really core to the cloud. It's really core to trusting. And again, to put this into perspective, and I'm a little bit biased because I'm Microsoft, I don't mind admitting, but I truly believe our intelligence and our visibility is potentially second to none. And let me explain why. So we generate over 43 trillion telemetry signals every single day. That's 360 petabytes of data. Roughly about 5 to 7% of the Microsoft cloud is actually dedicated to telemetry data. So how do you make sense of 43 trillion signals? Well, we deploy huge amounts of machine learning, data analytics. We have 8,500 people working in security. These are analysts, they're data scientists, they're researchers. And what we're trying to do is understand context. What's new? What's different? How are the attackers evolving? And in particular, we are actively tracking approximately 250 different threat actors right now. Some of these are ransomware operators, some of these are nation-state actors, but it's really trying to understand how security is evolving. And kind of underpinning a lot of this, as I said, is machine learning, it's artificial intelligence. And that's being utilized really significantly with a lot of customers, a lot of the technology that's being deployed. And it really brings to the forefront the ethical dilemmas when it comes to the use of AI. In particular, not just security, not just privacy, but how do you enable reliability, safety? How do you have a level of accountability? Now, one of the things we talked about is regulations are way lagging behind, particularly when it comes to AI. So it's incumbent on the big tech, in particular, to work with companies, to work with partners, to have codes of conduct. So just because you can doesn't mean you should. And that means that you really do have to have a level of accountability for what you're producing and what you're doing with that technology. Now, one of the things that Microsoft is heavily invested in when it comes to, in particular, Schrems 2 and personal data, they've got this issue of data transfers and the things like that. So we have created the EU data boundary. And this is really an evolution. And again, it's about that transparency, about having assurance for customers about data transfer. Where's my data? Who's got access to it? And one of the things that we've been investing in is you think American company, things must go to America. But that's not the case. What we're trying to make sure is data physically resides in the EU. We have opened 17 new data centers in the EU alone in the last 2 years. We're making sure that all support that you might need is in the EU. And also we're making sure that we have some secure remote access directly into your environment. So if you need tech support, you need help from Microsoft, there are no data transfers. And we're increasing our transparency when it comes to security and our use of privacy and our use of data and how we're utilizing a lot of those technologies. Now, to kind of bring this into context, a lot of what I've been talking about is what do we do in peacetime? Now, this has really brought it to the forefront. What happens in conflict? And I mentioned at the beginning with the war in Ukraine. And just not only do we have an accountability to protect citizens, enterprises, but right now it's about how do you protect a nation? Now, in peacetime, we have a need to keep our data as close to us as possible. We've got regulators telling us that we need to do this. This doesn't work in war. And at the beginning of this year, when the Russian troops started to amass on the Ukrainian border, and the reality dawned on them that they were going to be invaded, the Ukraine government highlighted that the vast majority of their data resided on-premise in their own data centers, in their own server rooms, and they were really concerned about how they were going to secure this data, how they were going to manage it, how they were going to protect it. And this is really testament to the role of big tech. So Microsoft, along with others, really steps in to help the Ukrainian government. And in the weeks and the months leading up to the invasion, Microsoft in particular not only moved 16 of the 17 ministries to the cloud, we also moved it out of Ukraine. We moved it en masse to another country. Now, on the 24th of February was the day Russia actually invaded Ukraine. That was not the start of the war. Actually, the war started the day before, and it was started by cyber warfare. Now, what we identified was the Russian government had 300 coordinated cyber attacks, all designed to hit Ukraine's critical infrastructure, telcos, all of their digital environments, to try and knock out as much of their infrastructure as possible. Now, Microsoft were there, we were monitoring, we were helping the government, and we identified a new strain of cyber attack, which is destructive and wiper malware, and we've denoted this as Foxblade. Now, at the time, a lot of our intelligence and what we share with governments would have been done with the Ukrainian government. It would have been done with other governments and other intelligence agencies. But it was imperative for us to be able to share this information as widely as possible and get this information into the hands of the people that have to make strategic decisions about where's my data, who's got access to that data, is my data secure? And this is where it's imperative on big tech in particular and other companies to share and collaborate and get this information out. But not only that, we've also had to step up when it comes to protecting the people. Now, one of the things that you've probably seen yourself, is just the kind of the crimes that are being committed against individuals. And we've talked about the use of AI. And again, we're putting AI to use in a social good context. Now, one of the things that we've seen as well as the cyber warfare, we've seen information warfare. And this is the role of disinformation campaigns, highly targeted at the Ukraine people, highly targeted at the Russian people, and highly targeted at Western and allies. Now, the thing that we need to look at is all the images that are being generated. How do you make sense? How do you know that these are images being generated from this particular war? And so we're putting the technology to use in protecting the people and looking at how we bring people to account when it comes to war crimes. And in particular, working through huge amounts of data, huge amounts of photographs that are being generated from multiple different across the social media and cataloguing them all and giving those to The Hague so that they can make decisions about what to do and what comes next. And we have actually invested over $250 million of free support to the Ukraine government in how they protect and how they secure their environment. Now, to round out a little bit, I talked about empowerment and some of the capabilities. Now, it's incumbent on Microsoft that you have a choice about how you manage, how you secure, how you enable your environment. So all of the security, all of the resilience capability is cloud native. It's built in, not bolted on. Now, some of that capability resides around identity, and identity really is core to a lot of what we're talking about. Either it's identity as you as an individual or identity from a devices. So identity and access management is really critical. The second part is really about threat protection. And from Microsoft's perspective, what we see, the visibility that we have, our whole opportunity is on automation. How do we automatically block known threats before they can cause damage into your environment? And we're putting that information directly into your hands so you can make decisions. And really, what are the attackers after? they're after data and the value of that data. Now, there's a kind of a misconception that they may be after financial data. The reality is every data, all data can be monetized. And we're starting to see the role of access brokers. So if I wanted, why would I waste my time trying to break into your network when I can actually just pay someone? I can pay someone for access. So information protection, protecting the data from external threats as well as internal threats is really key. And kind of the fourth area, there's one that we recently launched, which is all about privacy. And it's about empowering individuals to know where they have too much data exposure, data minimization. I'm just about to send an email from the UK to the USA. They don't know that's a data transfer unless I tell them. This is all about empowerment. And this is really where we're trying to get to in terms of being able to identify and do mass searches across your entire environment. We're not just talking Microsoft, on and off Microsoft. Literally, where's my data? Who's got access to it? Is it private? Is it secure? What do I need to do about it? And automating as much of those controls as possible. And even to the point where data is leaking outside of your organization, it's being dynamic to the incident as it happens. There's no point telling someone after the fact that they had a phishing email, they sent the wrong email to the wrong John Smith. We have to tell them at the time, and we need to empower them to be able to make a decision about that data and what's going on. And that's really where we're coming from. It's about being able to put the choice right in front of the people and right in front of the people that matter. Now, just to kind of close, I think our CEO, Satya Nadella, kind of really says it best in terms of being a trusted business. Now, I've talked about the role of big tech, but it really is imperative on all of us to make sure that whatever we're building, whatever we're putting out in the world, whether it's products, services, how they're evolving, has privacy, security, resilience by design and by default. And as I say, this is not going to go away. It's not changing. And hopefully today I've kind of spoken to you about the role of big tech. And I'm not just, obviously I'm from Microsoft, but this is also other cloud service providers, other technology providers have a real role to play in how we enable you and how we enable your businesses to be secure and have resilience and privacy by design. Now, I think I'm nearly at the end of time. So the Microsoft stand is literally right down the line. So please do come and speak to us. Please come and ask I think we don't have time for questions today, unfortunately. But I will be on stand if you want to, if you've got any questions, you want to come and talk to us, or if you want to explore any of the technology. So thank you so much for being with me today. And enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.